All right, let's get to Cuba.
Its problems, though, with fuel supplies, with an economy that's crumbling and a health service doesn't work, has gone on for decades, of course, though it's definitely getting worse because of the oil blockade that President Trump has imposed.
Hay muchas cosas que funcionan a través de combustible y entonces a la vez que no tenemos combustible estamos prácticamente paralizados.
A lot of people say it's worse than it's ever been. Now, the president has said that he expects to focus his attention on Cuba after he's dealt with Venezuela, of course, and Iran.
I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba.
Certainly, we know that the Americans and...
Yo, they're trying to be like me, bro. You see that? They're trying to be like me. Sky News. I mean, hey, whatever.
The Cubans are talking, but what does this all mean for the people of Cuba? What will this country look like when the blockade is lifted? This is Havana, the capital of Cuba. We're 3 months into a US oil blockade, and life is unraveling here faster than anyone predicted. This is right in the heart of the city, and through the rubbish bins, they search for anything of value and anything worth eating. Some collected in bags, slowly working their way through the mounds of rubbish, seeking out discarded food and vegetables rotting beneath the blistering sun, sifting out what they can scavenge from here. These aren't necessarily homeless people, but they are desperate people. Others can't wait, inspecting the food, then eating it. It's that desperate. There's been incredible poverty here in Cuba for a long time, but this type of open desperation hasn't existed here for many years. What people have been telling me is that the streets of Havana are famous for always being really clean, even though the people are really poor. But things have got worse, and as a lady was just explaining to me, this is here because the normal refuse people, the bin men, haven't got petrol to actually come and pick up the rubbish. So I've passed lots of street corners and it's like this. Since the start of the year, the United States has imposed an oil blockade on the country, meaning no fuel is allowed in. But it doesn't mean there's just a shortage of fuel. It means that everything falls apart. There's now a growing food crisis.
Yeah, remember this when you hear from people that like America is a good superpower, the best superpower that we could possibly have. This is the stuff that America does on autopilot. It doesn't need to do this at all. And yet this is the impact of America's cruel and unique mode of punishment, also known as its, sanctions regime.
Cubans are going hungry. This is economic warfare, every bit as destructive to life here as bombs and bullets would be. The homeless sleeping rough in back alleys is now a common sight where it was once unthinkable. People have to queue to get money from cash machines. There's a money supply issue in Cuba, and that means there's strict limits on what can be withdrawn. Often, there is no money to be withdrawn anyway. People also queue for hours to get bread from barely functioning.
By the way, none of this is because of socialism or communism or whatever. It's entirely related to the sanctions. Sanctions created and designed to have these sorts of outcomes. Sanctions enforced by the most powerful country on the planet against a country that is tiny in comparison. Approximately 10 million people living 90 miles off of our coastline.
Government-controlled bakeries.
They're limited to one piece a person when there is any to be had. This is a government ration shop known as a bodega. They're meant to provide essentials at cheap prices. The shelves are virtually bare.
I mean, that's also not, you know, there are definitely markets that sell a decent amount of product. Like, I don't think that's it's not as bare all over the place, for sure, at least from what I saw. Some places absolutely were bare, some places were not.
An emergency load of rice was being delivered. This is humanitarian aid. Cuba can't produce enough of its own. What we found was that more often than not, the bodega stores were completely empty or shut in this current crisis. Pharmacies as well have just empty shelves. This one appears to be open, but it seems there's virtually nothing in stock.
Have you seen your criticism from deculturation? No, I have no idea what that is, but that sounds like a sweaty ultra.
Please help me with one milk here.
Chatters, I have a serious question. Do I have to respond to every fucking person that has an opinion? Like, genuinely. Like, do you feel like there's something productive? Should I just stop watching what American imperialism is doing to Cuba right now and adding additional commentary from my own personal experience when I went to Cuba, and instead hear whatever the fuck some random dickhead had to say, whose only mode of activism is to fucking chirp about me? Is that what I should do? No, half the time it's the person or their boosters coming in to try to get a boost off her coattails.
One man, an English teacher, approached me, asking if I had paracetamol. He explained he didn't have enough money to buy medicine or milk in shops that aren't run by the government.
I'm an English teacher. Yeah. I teach a teenager in high school. But we have very few possibilities to buy in those shops, new shops, because the new market is, we can't afford. I mean, the people who live like me, like a wage, my income is 2,500 pesos like a teacher, and I can't afford to buy in the shop.
With the Cuban state failing to find a way of dealing with this crisis, it's fallen on charities to provide some help. The community of Sant'Egidio charity is now trying to feed a growing number of the most vulnerable. The elderly and homeless line up for a bowl of pasta, dished up by volunteers 3 times a week. It's a lifeline to these men and women, but the charity's resources are stretched and limited.
Well, the statistics vary, but somewhere between 72% and 90% of people in Cuba live in extreme poverty. About 3/4 say that they miss at least one meal a day because they simply can't afford to buy the food. They just haven't any ways of getting to it. For these people, the most vulnerable in society, this is the absolute lifeline. This is possibly the only proper meal they're going to get today for certain, but maybe for large parts of the rest of the week.
Linares Suarez Cardenas, the charity's charismatic senior manager, says this crisis is getting worse. They're now feeding children, opening schools and trying to provide medical care. They never used to do this before. Life has been tough in Cuba for many years, she says, but the US blockade is pushing it over the edge.
First off, how important are these meals for these people here?
Tener una buena alimentación. Es muy probable que si no almuerza aquí, cuando en su casa lo que coma es un pan solamente, no No es que un anciano pueda tener recursos económicos como para almorzar, desayunar, comer, merendar. Entonces esto es como, no es una gran ayuda, pero es algo que por lo menos reciben una alimentación.
There have been periods of time where there have been crises in Cuba's history, Soviet Union, COVID. Is this a major crisis period once again?
Sí, sí. Esto es un momento de crisis por muchas razones. Es decir, la falta de combustible, la situación de la luz, todas estas cosas. Es decir,
Yes, this is correct. The U.S. blockade didn't even start this year. It's something this video is not even mentioning. U.S. started applying secondary sanctions into any fucking carrier that was bringing in oil or anything to Cuba in 2019, and Trump won. That actually had a serious crippling effect on the energy blockade, on the energy grid anyway. Yeah.
Personas no pueden ni siquiera conservar el poco alimento que pueda resolver. Entonces, los precios suben.
Do you think that the fuel blockade by the United States is making things much worse?
La situación del combustible inmoviliza, te hace, no puedes moverte, tienes que estar te cierra un poco, te limita mucho. Y hay muchas cosas que funcionan a través del combustible. Y entonces, a la vez que no tenemos combustible, estamos prácticamente paralizados. Si en muchos lugares, por ejemplo, de acogida, han tenido que cerrar porque no tienen cómo.
Every economic sector in Cuba is being affected by this blockade, and one of the most obvious casualties is tourism. Sparkling classic cars, typical of virtually every image you've probably seen of Havana and renovated for tours of the city, now stand empty.
Any English-speaking, like, American website or any Western website where you try to figure out what people are saying about Cuba is going to be fucking unbelievably reactionary. Okay?
Drivers desperate for business.
I was there.
Historic squares are all but empty of the foreign visitors who throng these streets. Souvenir shops and markets are now displaying their wares to virtually nobody but the odd passerby. The tourism industry brought billions of dollars of hard cash to Cuba. That vital foreign currency arriving on its shores is slowly but surely drying up. President Trump's threats, the continuous talk of war, the events in Venezuela and Iran, and the lack of fuel for aeroplanes is taking its toll. The band may still be playing, but they've lost their audience. It's quite astonishing to experience this. From the sky, vast swathes of Havana are enveloped by darkness. People here are not used to this. Remember, these streets are in the center of the city. If there are lights, they're by and large from batteries or energy stored up from solar panels.
Damn, how'd they get the drone shots?
Normal
That's
life
crazy.
after nightfall simply can't continue as normal. People walk through the streets, illuminated by headlights and torches. Others wander around making preparations to go to bed. It is strange, even quite frightening, driving around in this darkness. Cuba powerless to provide its people with power. One One of the country's major hospitals is a beacon of light surrounded by darkness. Its generators keep it functioning just. Like the rest of the country, just about functioning is as good as it gets. Just because it's daylight doesn't mean there's power. Some of the power cuts last for days at a time.
Yep.
Some areas are restricted to a single hour in every 24. Petrol stations are now routine.
Why do you think corporations aren't helping Cuba out? First of all, corporations aren't moral actors. If anything, they're immoral actors. That's number one. Number two, corporations could genuinely profit from doing regular trade with Cuba. It's just America will sanction them and destroy what remains of that profit incentive anyway.
Routinely closed. There's not a fuel shortage at these stations. There is no fuel. Queues immediately form when news spreads that a garage has received a small supply of petrol. But it's never very much, and prices have gone through the roof. Cuba's revolutionary heroes still look down from the monolithic buildings and sports stadiums built to celebrate the country's new beginning decades ago. American economic sanctions have combined with the country's own mismanagement to leave many of these structures in disrepair. A lone athlete trains in the country's once formidable center of sporting excellence. The Pan American Stadium is now a crumbling monument to a past era. There's no money to rebuild this. There's no money at all. In the warmth of an early evening sun, young men gather in the square for an improvised game of handball. We're in a small town near Pinar del Rio, a farming community a couple of hours out of Havana. This is typical of most of Cuba's rural communities. There's not much going on. Pretty much everyone is poor. Unemployment.
He blamed the American sanctions of the country's own mismanagement. Yeah, I mean, mismanagement, of course, also plays somewhat of a role, but it's so marginal that I feel like it's inconsequential to bring up.
Is high, and more often than not, there's no electricity these days. When we arrived, there hadn't been power here for 2 days. When power comes on, people charge their electric scooters and car batteries to run lights in their homes. Many make use of bicycles as well, and of course, horses and donkeys. At sunset, some climb up onto the roofs of their Soviet-era apartment blocks, looking to find a bar of phone signal. They tell us communications with their family and friends in different towns is often impossible for days at a time. Others prepare charcoal fires to cook meager dinners for their families as the sun drops below the horizon. As night falls, single, weak lights flicker on in the midst of a general blackout. Row after row of apartment blocks shrouded in darkness. It will stay like this until sunrise. Right, communities like this one across the whole of Cuba have had problems with power shortages for a long time now, but everyone who lives here tells us it's getting worse since the fuel blockade imposed by President Trump on Cuba has really kicked in. And it affects all of their lives, right? So there's electricity, there's no heating, lighting and to be seen, there's no telecommunications. The pumps that push water around mean there's no running water. In this community, a farming community, they can't afford the fuel to get to the fields to do their farming, and they can't afford to run the farming equipment. The reality of life during this fuel blockade is summed up by the darkness, by the grinding monotony of living without the appliances of modern life. In many ways, Cuba goes back in time every single night.
Been invited to come and meet a family who live in this apartment block. Some of them have lights. It's solar power or batteries that they've got. They're on about the 3rd floor, I think, of this apartment. This is their electricity meters. They're not doing anything. Eventually, they're completely stationary. There's no power on at all. And they can often go days without power here. But we're going to come up and see what life's like.
Esto es una batería de 12 volts. O sea, hay baterías más caras o más baratas.
Oscar is a physics and maths teacher. Perhaps unsurprisingly, he's rigged up a system to keep the lights on at home. It's a short-term fix, but it is effective. Oscar and his wife Lise, an English teacher, live here with their son. Oscar takes home about £10 a month as a teacher. All government wages are poor, so he holds down 3 other jobs to try to make ends meet. They aren't happy with their lives, but they don't see Donald Trump as their savior. They prefer Cuba to do better, and the American blockade is making things worse.
Ante el mandato de Trump teníamos problemas, pero esto ha sido peor, mucho peor en todo sentido. Transporte, siembra, los mismos apagones han aumentado cantidad. Es muy difícil mantener la comida en refrigeradores, tenemos que comprar diario, ¿me entiendes? Entonces, ha sido mucho más difícil, como nunca he visto.
It's like, remember, wages are obviously controlled by the government, right? And wages are low. Why are wages low? Because there's no money circulating in the economy. Why is there no money circulating in the economy? Because you can't do regular commerce, like you can't do international trade. Cuba has the capacity to build factories in the same exact way that any other country does. But you can't get loans from any bank whatsoever to even start these sorts of infrastructure projects, start these sorts of projects. And even if you were able to build a factory, and there's plenty that exist in the country, you can't actually, make things and then sell them as you normally would, because the United States of fucking America makes it illegal for you to actually, well, not illegal, but like de facto illegal, to actually engage in any sort of international trade.
And you worry about the future?
El futuro puede ser incierto porque no sabemos a qué se pueda llegar a atrever, porque vemos que
Wait, he said one teacher makes 1,200 and the other says 10? Yes, 1,200 like in Cuban pesos. Which with in American currency, it translates to somewhere around $10.
Venezuela es una potencia en cuanto a esto de lo que es.
Or I don't know what the actual currency exchange rate
Espero
is.
que por un problema de que no hay
Oh, he said
recursos
10
naturales,
pounds.
él nos deja tranquilo. Y sea todo un problema político.
In another apartment, Jeanette prepares the charcoal to make her dinner for the evening with the help of the light of a torch. She's a pediatric physiotherapist and lives alone in her 2-bedroom flat. Much of her extended family live in the blocks around her in town. Getting by is just a way of life for Jeanette. She'd like more, but there isn't more. Like so many Cubans we've met, she's scared about the future and afraid about what may happen to her country.
Donald Trump says he wants to bring about huge changes in Cuba, that the blockade is to try and bring about those changes. Do people in Cuba resent this interference?
Al final, el mismo pueblo es el que ha tenido que tomar todas las consecuencias para el cambio que puede ocurrir. La necesidad ha aumentado. El pueblo es quien lo está sufriendo día a día.
Do you worry about what's going to happen next?
Por supuesto, que vivimos aquí. Somos los que viviremos las consecuencias de lo que pueda ocurrir.
By morning, the town slowly awakes. Another night without power gives way to another day without power. It's relentless. Cuba's economic mismanagement and neglect of infrastructure over decades contributes to this situation. But years of sanctions and the current American fuel blockade certainly has made the power problem here more acute. It's a Sunday, so it's even quieter than usual. Some pass by dressed up in their Sunday best, heading to church. For anyone who does have a job or has a way of finding food, they head out. Horses and carts are pressed into action. People here don't have much.
I'm gonna keep it a buck. I didn't see not one fucking horse carriage when I was there. And I did see actually a lot of fucking regular cars driving around, including, I mean, it wasn't a lot. It was certainly a lot more than what this guy has shown, though. I'm sure there is one horse carriage guy, but he's been hyper focusing on that one horse carriage guy to frame it as though like Cubans are using horses to get around. Or maybe he's not in Havana. Maybe it's the countryside. That's probably...
A short distance away in the countryside, we saw the difference between having little to having
yeah,
nothing.
Okay, never mind.
The most vulnerable in rural Cuba are old and frankly helpless. Nano and Pancho live on a farm, or rather a shack on farmland. Pancho tells me her state pension is $1.12 a month. That's 83 pence a month. Obviously, nobody can live on this. She and her husband are utterly dependent on their family and help from the community. The Cuban government doesn't like anyone seeing this type of poverty, but it is very real.
It's so sad because, like, one of the massive improvements that the Cuban Revolution offered was the fact that the countryside was brought up to similar comparable standards to like the big cities, right? That was a huge deal. Like the Cuban Revolution was able to improve the infrastructure all around the island, bring literacy rates up. And America, after, decades of sanctions, has forcibly destroyed the Cuban economy to such a degree where like the countryside has gone back into its previous mode of existence, like peasantry.
Can I ask you, lots of people talk about oil blockades by the United States and that life is much harder now. Does it make any difference to you? Have you heard about those things? Or does it make any difference to you at all? Life was already tough.
No. Hace mala vida, es difícil también. Esto no es fácil sin corriente, sin con que alumbrarte de noche. Yo me tengo que levantar 1000 veces, Oscarito, de noche. Ahora en noche me caí en el baño. Di tú que no le pegué la de esa la losa. Que si yo me subo por la losa, rebalo y me mato. Oscuro, mijo. Entonces ni una linternita para alumbrarte. Porque el yerno me había tenido ni me lo prestaba, pero está haciendo guardia y no me lo puedo prestar.
Heading back towards Havana, it struck me that there can't be a clearer illustration of fuel shortages than taking a trip on one of Cuba's motorways. We barely see a car. Mostly we pass horse-drawn carts and slow-moving motorcycles and scooters. We pass parched, burning fields, smoke drifting across the road. There's no fire engine to put out these fires. Well, there is. It just hasn't got any fuel. There's barely any traffic on the roads now. Economic highways appear to be redundant for all but the most determined or needy traveler. A reminder of this country's past status can be seen in the magnificence of old Havana.
Disgusting old bastard. I don't think he set the fire. Look. I'll be honest. While there is like a little bit, there's definitely a decent amount of like maneuvering that he's doing where he every now and then will be like, well, you see the government has failed you, right? Over and over again. It's good for people to see what is going on here. Obviously, the main takeaway shouldn't be, wow, look at how poor these Cubans are, and this must be communism. But it's still important to see the conditions imposed upon the Cuban population by the United States of America. You know the truth. And then these people who are starving, these people who are suffering, these people who we have caused tremendous harm to. Now Trump is talking about, overtaking this country militarily, which, let's be real, doesn't really have the capacity to put up a fight whatsoever. This is not like an Iran-style situation. This is in some ways, the Cuban government is infinitely more competent than the Venezuelan government and the way that the Venezuelan government is operating. But also, in many other ways, they do not have a fraction of the military force that the Venezuelan government had, because Venezuela is an oil-rich country at the end of the day and was able to build military forces. And all of that amounted to nothing, of course, because clearly the American military superiority still was able to, and maybe a little bit of engineering behind the scenes, was able to create a successful military operation. Yeah, none of them said the blockade or the sanctions are good. All of them said is hurting them. Yet the Trump admin's whole rationale is to help the Cuban people. Exactly. Trump kissed Erica Kirk during the Turning Point event at Dream City Church in Phoenix, Arizona. Oh, God, it's so gross. Once the bull has been stabbed 100 times, it doesn't take much to finish the job. Yeah. It's crazy to think that Cuba had like a pretty competent military force, first strike capabilities against the United States of America in the USSR era, nuclear arms, Russian nuclear arms that were surface to surface missiles too, not just anti-air defense systems, but surface to surface missiles, an air force. It was a sovereign state. America fucking hated that shit, obviously, but this is why I say, Khrushchev was a lion.
With its beautiful, ornate neoclassical mansions, Art Deco buildings, and Baroque churches that marked out Cuba as a special place for hundreds of years. To a degree, it still exists at first glance.
Yeah, it has a lovely...
Yeah, Cuba not only had a very competent military force, but they straight up sent that competent military force to Africa to play a formative role in liberating African nations.
Feeling about it, that Spanish colonial look. Parts of the center of downtown in the old city are in good nick. But actually, a little bit more closely in Havana, these are some of the most iconic buildings, hotels, that are actually completely and utterly destroyed, emptied. It looks more like a war zone than a major city, the capital of a country. Sort of, you have to scratch beneath the veneer here. You don't have to scratch very far. You see just how much trouble Cuba is in.
The truth is, the buildings are neglected and slowly falling into ruin.
It's true.
In the midst of this once magnificent
It's so beautiful too. It's so sad. It's so fucking beautiful.
City, many of its people are living in squalor, clinging onto existence in buildings from a different era. It all adds to the sense that this large Caribbean island, a dominant cultural and political symbol, and still regarded by its island neighbors as a regional powerhouse, It's being strangled because of its political inclinations that took root here a couple of generations ago. Observers, neutral or otherwise, agree people can't continue to live like this. The current fuel embargo is quite simply collective punishment on a mass scale. President Trump says Cuba is next, but nobody here, and perhaps not even in the White House, have any idea what next means. The merry-go-round of threats, sanctions, blockades, and sometimes negotiations about the future go on. When it stops, is there even a future for this generation? Is there even a plan?